She arrived at her sister's wedding wearing her best dress and her oldest wound. For 33 years, Evelyn Hart had been the family's best-kept secret. Not celebrated, not introduced, just tolerated. The kind of woman people look past at parties, the kind of daughter a mother forgets to mention. But tonight, in a ballroom full of powerful strangers, her mother did something she would spend the rest of her life regretting. She sat Evelyn beside the kitchen door. What her mother didn't know, what none of them knew, was who was sitting right beside her. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. The drive to the Harrington Grand Hotel took 40 minutes, and Evelyn spent most of it watching the city dissolve outside the passenger window. Streetlights smearing into long gold threads as rain started to beat against the glass. She hadn't said much since they left her apartment. Salvatore hadn't pushed her to. That was one of the things she'd learned about him in the 14 months they'd been together. He didn't fill silence the way other people did, didn't rush to patch over the quiet with empty words. He just let silence exist the way he let most things exist, with the steady patience of a man who had never once felt the need to prove himself in a room. She wasn't sure whether that quality frightened her or steadied her. Most days it was both. "You don't have to go," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. He didn't look at her when he said it. He kept his eyes on the road, hands loose on the wheel, like the offer was nothing more than information. "I know." "Then tell me why you're going." Evelyn pressed her fingernail into the seam of her clutch purse and didn't answer right away. Outside, the rain picked up. The wipers scraped back and forth. She thought about Vanessa's face when she called last week, that particular brightness in her sister's voice, the cheerful, artificial warmth that always made Evelyn feel like she was being managed rather than loved. "You're coming, right? Mom wants the whole family there. It'll mean so much to me." What it meant to Vanessa was a completed guest list. What it meant to their mother was a family portrait without gaps. What it meant to Evelyn was something she hadn't let herself name yet. "Because she's my sister," Evelyn finally said. Salvatore didn't respond, but something shifted in the set of his jaw. The faintest compression, there and gone. She knew that look. It wasn't judgment. It was the look of a man who understood loyalty better than almost anyone alive, and who had spent enough years watching people use that loyalty against each other to recognize when it was happening again. She looked back out the window. "Don't do that," she said quietly. "Do what? That thing where you already know how the night's going to go?" A pause, then, softer than she expected. "I just don't want you to get hurt." Evelyn pulled in a slow breath. The Harrington Grand came into view then, its facade lit up gold against the wet black sky. A line of town cars idling at the entrance, valets in white gloves moving between them like choreography. She could see guests filing through the front doors. Women in gowns, men in dark suits, the kind of crowd that had never once in its life worried about the cost of a meal. Her stomach tightened. She was wearing the burgundy dress she'd bought on sale 3 weeks ago. She'd told herself it looked good. Standing in her bathroom mirror that morning, she'd almost believed it. "I'll be fine," she said. Salvatore pulled to the curb. A valet appeared at his door. Salvatore ignored the valet's outstretched hand and opened the door himself, unhurried, unbothered by the slight confusion on the young man's face. He came around to Evelyn's side and offered his hand. She took it. His grip was warm and certain, the grip of someone who didn't second-guess physical gestures. "You look beautiful," he said. No performance in it, just a fact he was stating. She let herself hold on to that for exactly 2 seconds. Then the doors opened and the noise of the ballroom hit them both like a wave. The Harrington Grand's main event space was everything the name promised and more. Ceiling-high floral arrangements in white and blush gold. Round tables draped in ivory linen, candles burning at every setting. A string quartet near the dais playing something elegant and slightly too loud. The room was already 3/4 full, guests moving between tables, air thick with perfume and the particular electricity of wealthy people performing their best selves for each other. Evelyn found the escort table near the entrance and gave her name to a young woman with a clipboard. The woman ran her finger down the list, ran it again. A pause that lasted half a beat too long. Evelyn Hart? Yes. And your guest? Salvatore said his name. The young woman wrote it down without recognition, which was either completely ordinary or a testament to how well he moved through the world without announcing himself. She handed them a small card printed with their table number, Table 22. Evelyn stared at the number for just a moment before folding the card in half. She knew the room's layout. She'd seen the floor plan in Vanessa's email weeks ago when her sister had sent the guest seating arrangements to the full family chain. Table 3 was the family table. First row, center stage. Table 22 was along the back wall. She felt it register in her chest the way a cold thing registers when you swallow it whole. A deep, specific ache. Not surprise, and something worse than surprise. The particular heaviness of a confirmation, of a suspicion you'd spent years hoping was wrong. Salvatore's hand rested light at the small of her back. She couldn't tell if he'd read the table number or if he was simply doing what he always did, staying close. She straightened her spine. "Let's find it," she said. Bump. They wound through the room, and Evelyn kept her gaze moving, kept her chin at a neutral angle, the way she'd learned to move through spaces that didn't want her. Not looking down, not looking like she was trying to hide, but not inviting contact either. A kind of practiced invisibility she'd developed before she was old enough to name it. She saw her mother first. Catherine Hart was standing near the family table in a seafoam green gown that must have cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent, laughing with a man in a charcoal suit, one hand resting at his elbow like they were old friends. Catherine was 61 and looked 10 years younger on the strength of discipline and money, with the kind of posture that came from a lifetime of never once slouching to let someone else feel taller. She turned her head at the exact moment Evelyn came close enough. Their eyes met. Something crossed Catherine's face, not warmth, not even the performance of warmth, more like a rapid calculation, a split-second risk assessment. Then she smiled, and the smile landed exactly where smiles like that always land, 2 inches short of reaching her eyes. "Evelyn?" She said it like a task she was completing. "You made it." "I made it," Evelyn agreed. Catherine's gaze moved immediately to Salvatore. An automatic sweep, suit, posture, watch, shoes, the same inventory she ran on every man she met. Whatever she found must have satisfied something, because the performance of her smile upgraded by a fraction. "And you must be—" She waited, openly expecting an introduction. "Salvatore," he said. He didn't add anything, didn't offer a last name, didn't extend a hand. Catherine waited a beat, then extended hers instead. He shook it. Brief, dry, no theater. "Salvatore," she repeated, in the tone of someone filing a name away. "How lovely. We've heard very little about you." The smile didn't waver. The dig landed clean. Evelyn felt the familiar contraction in her ribs, that small automatic flinch she'd spent decades trying to train out of herself. She answered before it could show. "We didn't want to make a big deal of it," she said evenly. "Of course." Catherine turned back toward the room, already moving on. "You'll be at 22. There was a bit of a reshuffling with the Whitmore side. It all got quite complicated. I'm sure you understand." She said it the way someone says things when they very specifically do not want to be questioned about them. Evelyn understood. She had always understood. "Of course," she said. Her own voice sounded flat and distant to her, like something reaching her from the far end of a hallway. Her mother turned away. Assam. Table 22 was pressed against the wall beside the service corridor entrance, far enough from the dais that the string quartet was a blur of motion, and the voices at the family table were completely inaudible. The table had 8 settings, but only 4 place cards. An older couple already seated, the Kellers, distant friends of the Whitmore family, who smiled politely when Evelyn and Salvatore sat down, and then returned immediately to their own conversation. A young man, early 20s, who was almost certainly somebody's +1, and who spent the first 10 minutes staring at his phone. The kitchen door was 2 feet from Evelyn's left shoulder. Every few minutes it swung open with a metallic rush of sound, dishes clanging, a chef's voice cutting through, the smell of something heavy and hot, and then swung shut again. Evelyn set her small clutch on the table and folded her hands in her lap and did not look toward the family table. Salvatore settled into his chair with the ease of a man who had sat in every kind of room. Boardrooms, back offices, interrogation rooms, and somewhere, surely, rooms that didn't have names. He wasn't performing comfort, he simply was comfortable. The way certain people are comfortable everywhere, not because the world accommodates them, but because they stopped waiting for accommodation years ago. He poured them both water from the carafe on the table. She took hers and drank and looked out at the room. Across the space, Vanessa was holding court at the family table with the unself-conscious ease of someone who had never once sat beside a kitchen door. She was extraordinary looking. That had always been the particular cruelty of it, that Evelyn wasn't able to hate her for it, that Vanessa was genuinely beautiful in the way that made rooms reorganize around her, with deep auburn hair and their mother's posture and a laugh that carried. She was wearing ivory, something architectural and expensive, and Landon Whitmore beside her was all square jaw and old money certainty, his hand on the back of her chair like a claim already made. The Whitmore table occupied the center right of the room. Senior family members, business associates, a state senator who Evelyn vaguely recognized from a billboard she passed on the highway. Power stacked on power. The kind of gathering that reminded you wealth wasn't just money. It was a country with its own language and customs and borders, and certain people were simply born holding a passport. A hand touched her wrist lightly. She looked down, Salvatore's fingers, resting without pressure. "You don't have to pretend to be fine," he said quietly. "I'm not pretending." "Evelyn." She looked at him then. His face was level, dark-eyed, still. There was something in his expression she'd never been able to fully decode, a depth that went down further than she'd yet found the bottom of, a quality of attention that made her feel, in moments like this, both completely seen and completely terrified of what that meant. "I've sat at worse tables," she said. He studied her for a moment. "That's not the same as saying this doesn't matter." She didn't answer that. Because it did matter. It had always mattered. 33 years of mattering, compressed into the 2 inches between her shoulder blade and the service door she could still feel swinging open behind her. She'd been 8 years old the first time she understood she was different in the way that carried costs. It wasn't a single moment. It never was. It was a collection of them, small and cumulative, the way water damage works. Not one flood, just years of slow seeping until the foundation is soft. Her mother remarking on what Evelyn was eating at dinner. The girls at school, who made a specific face when she sat next to them. The birthday party in 4th grade where she wore a dress she'd loved and came home and stood in the bathroom mirror for 20 minutes trying to understand what exactly was wrong with her. Vanessa had been born when Evelyn was 4. She had been a pretty baby in the way some babies are pretty, in ways that already seemed like early career moves. And as she grew, she only became more of what she'd started as, easy, bright, magnetic, effortlessly inhabiting whatever space she occupied. Their mother had bloomed around Vanessa the way certain plants bloom in the right light. It wasn't that Catherine Hart was cruel by nature. Evelyn had spent years trying to be fair about this. It was that her mother had a very specific image of what her family was supposed to look like, and Evelyn had never fit it, and Catherine had no skill for managing things that didn't fit except to minimize them. Evelyn had become very good at being minimized. She'd also, quietly, become very good at other things. At numbers, which were clean and honest and didn't have favorites. At running her own bookkeeping firm, which she'd built from scratch over 8 years of 70-hour weeks and careful, grinding work. At living alone in a way that had slowly stopped feeling like defeat and started feeling like shelter. She was 33, had 11 regular clients, owned her car outright, and had not borrowed money from her family in a decade. None of this had ever been mentioned at a family gathering. She met Salvatore De Luca 14 months ago at a coffee shop in the financial district, which was the kind of origin story that should have been unremarkable and instead had been the strangest 14 months of her life. He had been sitting at the table beside hers working through a set of documents, and she'd knocked her laptop bag into his coffee, and the entire thing had gone over the edge, and she'd stood there mortified while he looked at the spilled coffee and then looked at her with an expression entirely free of irritation. "Don't worry about it," he'd said. She'd apologized anyway. He'd offered to buy her coffee instead, which made no logical sense given that she was the one who'd ruined his, and she'd pointed that out, and he'd said, "I know," with a faint smile that somehow didn't feel like condescension. She'd sat back down. He'd returned to his documents. 20 minutes later, he'd asked if she'd done the numbers on the fourth column of whatever spreadsheet she was staring at. She had. They'd spent an hour talking about bookkeeping methodologies, which was not a sentence she ever expected to form about a meaningful conversation. She had not known who he was for the first 3 months. She did not mean that the way people sometimes say it, as a kind of false humility or narrative convenience. She genuinely, specifically did not know. Salvatore De Luca was not a man who introduced himself with his full significance. He moved through ordinary life with ordinary mannerisms, spoke like someone who had no need to impress, asked questions and actually listened to the answers, and showed up when he said he would. These were qualities so basic that they should have been unremarkable, and yet in her experience they were almost entirely rare. When she found out, when a client mentioned the name and her assistant had looked it up and come back with an expression Evelyn had never seen on her before, the ground had shifted. She'd sat with it for 3 days before she'd said anything to him. He told her the truth without dramatizing it. What I do is what it is. I'm not asking you to be part of it. I'm asking if you want to be part of me. She had no clean answer to that. She still didn't. But here they were, 14 months later, sitting at table 22 beside a kitchen door, and he was pouring her water and not pretending to be something he wasn't. And she thought sometimes that this was as close as she had ever come to being chosen. The cocktail portion of the evening stretched. The room filled. The volume climbed. Evelyn watched the family table. She couldn't help it. Kept pulling her gaze back to it the way you keep touching a bruised place, not to hurt yourself, just to confirm it's still there. Her mother was animated, laughing, leaning close to one of the Whitmore aunts like they were old friends. Her Aunt Patricia was there, the one who had made the weight comments at Christmas every year until Evelyn stopped going to Christmas. Her cousin Darren, who had once told her at a barbecue that she'd be pretty if she lost 30 pounds, said it like it was helpful advice. She hadn't been to a family event in almost 2 years. She told herself she needed the distance. She told herself she was protecting herself. Looking at the table now, she wondered if what she'd actually been doing was giving herself the mercy of forgetting, and whether that mercy had only made tonight harder. A waiter appeared and set down small plates of appetizers. Tiny things on white china, 3 bites each. The young man with the phone pocketed it long enough to eat one and then resumed his screen. The Kellers discussed the weather. Salvatore ate methodically, no wasted motion, like a man who fueled himself without sentiment. Evelyn moved one of the small things on her plate from one side to the other. "Eat something," Salvatore said without looking at her. "I'm not hungry. You'll need energy." She looked at him. Energy for what? He met her eyes. Something passed across his face. Not quite a warning, not quite a plan, but the space between those two things, the place where decision lives before it becomes action. "Eat something," he said again, gentler this time. She ate. The formal program began at 7:30. The lights dimmed. The string quartet finished their last piece and a band took over, something softer and ambient for the early part of the evening. A master of ceremonies, polished man, practiced warmth, took the microphone and welcomed everyone to the wedding reception of Vanessa Hart and Landon Whitmore. Applause. The room transformed. The self-performance of wealth softened into something almost human for a few minutes. The genuine sentimentality that even cynical rooms produce when a wedding toast begins. Evelyn watched her sister stand to receive the acknowledgement. Vanessa was radiant. That word felt overused, but it was accurate. A physical brightness about her, the particular glow of someone getting exactly what they wanted and knowing it. She pressed a hand to her chest when the applause swelled. She laughed and leaned into Landon's shoulder, and Landon kissed her temple, and even Evelyn, sitting beside the kitchen door with cold food on her plate, felt something loosen slightly in her chest. She loved her sister. That was the wound that never healed cleanly. She had never stopped loving Vanessa, not even when Vanessa let things happen that she should have stopped. That was the specific hell of it. Not indifference, but love with no safety in it. Her mother rose from the family table. The MC stepped aside and Catherine Hart took the microphone with the confidence of a woman who had been waiting for this. 33 years ago, Catherine began, voice clear and rounded, I had a daughter who made me understand what it means to be a mother. Evelyn's hand tightened slightly on her water glass. Vanessa changed our family. She brought us joy, light, beauty. Everything a parent hopes to pour into a child and watch grow. Catherine's eyes were bright, real emotion in them. That was the thing about her mother, the thing that made it complicated. She wasn't performing. This was genuine. She genuinely felt this way, which was worse, somehow, than if she'd been performing. And tonight, watching her beside Landon, I see the future I always believed she'd have. The family I always knew she'd build. Catherine raised her glass. To Vanessa, my daughter, my heart. The room drank. Evelyn drank too. Her throat felt thick. Salvatore wasn't drinking. She noticed that only peripherally. He'd set his glass down and was watching her mother return to the family table, and his face was very still, the way faces go still when the thing behind them is not still at all. She started to reach for his arm. And then the kitchen door behind her swung open and hit the back of her chair with a bang, and a waiter came through with a tray and apologized without looking at her. And the small violence of it, the small, completely accidental violence, was somehow the thing that broke it open. Something cracked in her sternum. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the quiet structural collapse of something that had been holding weight for 33 years and had finally run out of the material to hold it. She set her fork down, pressed both hands flat on the tablecloth. The table linen was smooth under her palms. She focused on the texture of it. The room sounds pushed against her, the music, the laughter from the family table, the muffled clatter from behind the kitchen door, the MC saying something she couldn't track. She breathed through her nose, slow, even. She was not going to cry in this room. She was not going to give this room that. Evelyn? Salvatore's voice, close. She looked at him. He was watching her with that eyes dark, completely present attention, and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen there before. Not pity, nothing like pity. Something harder and quieter. A kind of controlled fury, held very still. I'm fine, she said. You don't have to keep saying that. I know. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I'm not saying it for you. He was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned slightly forward, elbows on the table, voice pitched only for her. I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it. She held his gaze. Do you want to keep letting them treat you this way? The question didn't come at her like a provocation. It came like the precise opposite, like a door held open in the dark, like someone finally asking the question she'd been building the courage to ask herself for 3 decades. She looked at him, then she looked out at the room, the family table. Her mother, flushed and happy, leaning close to someone else's mother. Vanessa, bright and untouchable at the center of everything. The other faces she recognized, aunts and cousins and old family friends who had known Evelyn her entire life and treated her as the afterthought the family had trained them to see. All of it was familiar. All of it had been familiar forever. And for the first time, she let herself think the things she'd never quite let herself think. They would never change. Not because they were incapable of it, in the abstract philosophical sense, but because they had no reason to. She served a function exactly as she was, the lesser one, the standard against which the better one shone brighter. They didn't see her as a person they were failing, they saw her as part of the architecture. The grief of that was clean and complete, and it passed through her in the space of a breath. She looked back at Salvatore. Her eyes were wet. She didn't let the tears fall. She shook her head. Not yet. No. But she was telling him the answer was no. No, she was not going to keep letting them treat her this way. And something in his face shifted, the very finest shift, so slight she might have imagined it, except she had spent 14 months learning the geography of his expressions. He reached forward and set his hand over hers on the tablecloth. His palm was warm and dry and certain. Then stay right here, he said quietly. Don't move. She felt, more than heard, the change in his breathing, the even, measured settling that she'd learned to recognize not as calm, but as the thing underneath calm. The bedrock. He was still looking at her. I'm going to stand up. Her heart lurched once. She thought she should say something. Tell him it was fine. Tell him to let it go. Say what she always said in rooms like this to men who wanted to intervene on her behalf, which was, please don't. It'll only make it worse. But she had spent 33 years saying, please don't. And here she was, beside the kitchen door, at table 22. Okay, she said, and Salvatore De Luca stood up. In the moment before anyone noticed, the room was still at full noise. The band playing, glasses clinking, the MC making his way back toward the microphone for the next toast. Then someone at the table nearest them glanced over. A woman in a silver gown who leaned to say something to the man beside her. He looked. Then the table behind them. A chain reaction, quiet and rapid, spreading outward from table 22 in a slow, widening ring of attention. Because Salvatore was not a loud man and had never needed to be. He stood with a stillness that pulled focus the way gravity pulls falling things. Not dramatically, not with effort, simply because that was what he was. The lights caught the edge of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the quality of controlled patience in every line of him. And one by one, the room went quiet. Not all at once. In pieces. Conversation dropping off table by table until the band played into a silence they noticed and faltered in and stopped. The MC turned from the microphone with a small, confused look. The Whitmore family table turned. The family table turned. Her mother turned. In the absolute quiet of the Harrington Grand's main ballroom, Salvatore set his hand on the back of his chair and looked out at 300 people and said nothing. And the room waited. And Evelyn's heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth, her hands flat on the tablecloth, the kitchen door silent behind her for once. And she understood somewhere deep and wordless that whatever happened next was going to change everything. She just didn't know yet what everything meant. 300 people were holding their breath. Evelyn could feel it, the collective suspension of the room, the way sound had drained out of the space like water from a cracked basin, leaving something close to total stillness. The band had stopped. The MC stood near the dais with his cards in one hand, and an expression she might have found funny under any other circumstances, a man whose entire professional training had not prepared him for this exact moment. Salvatore hadn't moved. He stood behind his chair with one hand resting on its back, looking out at the room with the patience of someone who had learned at some cost, and over a long time, that the person who controls the silence controls everything inside it. He wasn't performing. That was the particular quality of him that rooms like this one had no category for. He genuinely didn't need anything from them, not their approval, not their attention, not even their fear, though he collected all three without trying. He let the silence stretch another 3 seconds. Then he spoke. My name is Salvatore De Luca. His voice carried without effort. Clean projection, no theater to it. The name went out into the room and settled, and for a moment nothing happened, just the faint sound of the air conditioning overhead, and somewhere a chair shifting, and then the first whisper. It started at the Whitmore table. Evelyn watched it happen without fully understanding it yet. A woman in a black gown leaning to the man beside her, her lips moving, his head turning sharply, both of them suddenly very still in a new way. A different kind of stillness than before. Not the passive stillness of waiting, the active stillness of recognition. The man, 50s, silver-haired, the kind of build that had once been athletic and settled into authority, had gone the color of old paper. Evelyn looked at Salvatore. He hadn't moved his eyes from the center of the room. I've been sitting at this table for the past 2 hours, he said. He didn't indicate the kitchen door, didn't gesture toward the service corridor, didn't do anything as pointed as that. He didn't need to. I want to take a moment to introduce myself to the people in this room, properly. From the family table, Evelyn saw her mother's expression begin its shift. Catherine had the social instincts of a woman who had spent her entire life reading rooms, and what she was reading now was producing a small, uncertain crease between her brows. Not alarm yet, just the first faint signal of recalculation. Vanessa's face was harder to read. She was watching Salvatore with the focused attention of someone trying to place something, one hand resting on the table and the other at Landon's sleeve. Landon had gone rigid. It was so complete, so instantaneous that Evelyn almost missed it, the way his spine had locked, the particular whitening of his knuckles against the table's edge. He knew the name. Whatever that meant, whatever that contained, he knew it. Salvatore continued. The Whitmore family is well known in this city. 40 years of real estate development, construction interests, financial holdings. He paused. Also well known to certain people who deal in distressed debt. The silver-haired man at the Whitmore table stood up. I don't think this is the appropriate Sit down, Mr. Whitmore. Salvatore said it without raising his voice. Didn't look at the man. Just said it with the flat certainty of someone giving an instruction to someone they know will comply. Gerald Whitmore sat down. The room absorbed that. Evelyn felt her hands pressing harder into the tablecloth. She hadn't realized she'd been doing it. Salvatore picked up his wine glass from the table, a slow, deliberate motion, and held it without drinking. 14 months ago, the Whitmore Group carried $230 million in debt across a portfolio of over-leveraged commercial properties. The lenders were calling. The holding company's legal team had already begun preparing for a restructuring that would have been very public and very terminal. Mom, Jens. He turned the glass slightly in his fingers. A debt acquisition firm purchased that exposure quietly through a series of intermediary vehicles. The Whitmore Group's lenders settled. The pressure disappeared. The family's assets stabilized. Silence. Pure and total. That firm, Salvatore said, belongs to me, Dag. The sound that went through the room was not a gasp. It was more like a structural adjustment, the specific acoustic of a space reconfiguring itself around new information, chairs shifting, people leaning, the tight murmur of 300 separate private reckonings happening simultaneously. Gerald Whitmore's face had moved from the color of old paper to something approaching gray. Landon was looking at the tablecloth. His jaw was working slightly, like a man choosing between several things to say and finding all of them wrong. Vanessa's hand had come away from Landon's sleeve and was now resting in her own lap, and she was looking at Salvatore with an expression that was entirely new to Evelyn. Not her sister's social brightness, not the managed warmth, but something stripped of all of that. Fear with good manners over top of it, and the good manners were losing. Salvatore set his glass down. This wedding is occurring tonight because I chose not to collect what I'm owed. He looked at Landon directly. One sustained look, no hostility in it, just information being delivered. Your family is solvent tonight because I permitted it to remain so. I think it's useful for the people in this room to understand that. From somewhere to Evelyn's left, a man she didn't recognize said, very quietly, Jesus. Catherine Hart rose from the family table. She did it with the control of a woman who had managed social crises for decades, standing slowly, not rushing, not radiating the panic Evelyn could see fighting to get out around the edges of her face. She had the posture. She had the voice. She was going to try to manage this. Salvatore. His name in her mouth now, and the warmth in it was not like before. Before it had been evaluative warmth, the warmth you extend to a guest whose status you're still assessing. This was something else, the warmth of someone who has realized they're losing ground and is attempting negotiation. I'm sure we can... Mrs. Hart, Catherine stopped. I wasn't finished, Salvatore said. Something moved through Catherine's face. It was brief, and she controlled it fast. But Evelyn had spent 33 years studying her mother's face, and she saw it, the shock of being stopped, of being told, in front of people whose opinion she valued more than almost anything, that she did not have the floor. Salvatore turned his attention from the center of the room. He turned it with total precision to Catherine Hart. Tonight, he said, I sat beside the woman I love, and I watched her family seat her next to a service entrance so she wouldn't crowd the family table. The room did not move. I watched a woman who built her own business from zero, who has more intelligence and more character than anyone seated at that family table, be treated like an afterthought at her own sister's wedding. His voice was even, each word placed exactly. I watched her mother stand at that microphone and deliver a speech full of love for one daughter, and I watched the other daughter sit 2 inches from a kitchen door and not be mentioned once. Evelyn's throat closed. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected him to say that specific thing. The speech, the silence in the speech, the omission that had landed in her chest like a stone and sunk. Catherine's color was changing. That is a family matter, she started. It stopped being only a family matter when you did it in a room full of people, Salvatore said. In front of your associates, your social contacts, people whose opinion matters to you. You made it public. I'm simply responding in kind. He looked at Evelyn then. She looked back at him. His face was exactly the same as it always was, contained, dark-eyed, steady. and yet something in it was reaching toward her. Not performance. The realest thing she'd seen in the realest moment of an evening that had already stripped everything false off the walls. She spent 33 years making herself small so this family could feel larger, he said. That ends tonight. Catherine moved first. She came around the end of the family table with the controlled energy of a woman who had spent decades believing that forward motion and good posture were the solutions to most problems, and she crossed the floor toward table 22 while the room watched her do it, because nobody in this space was going to pretend not to watch. Evelyn felt her shoulders lock. Old reflex. The automatic bracing that her body did before her mother reached her. Catherine stopped at the table's edge. She looked at Salvatore first, a long, reassessing look. And then she looked at Evelyn. Evelyn. Her voice had dropped. Not enough that the nearest tables couldn't hear, but low enough to simulate privacy. I think we should talk about this somewhere else. No, Evelyn said. The word came out before she'd consciously formed it. Not a refusal she'd rehearsed or prepared, just the simplest, flattest answer to the thing her mother was asking, which was, please help me manage this quietly and let me preserve my social standing. Catherine blinked. I understand you're upset. I'm not upset. Evelyn looked at her mother steadily. Her heart was going fast, but her hands were flat and still on the table. I'm 33 years past upset. Evelyn, this isn't the place. You chose the place. Evelyn heard her own voice like something slightly outside herself. You put me here. You put me at this table. You gave the speech you gave. This is the place you built. Catherine's jaw was tight. I did not mean... The seating arrangement was complicated. The Whitmore family had specific requests. We had to accommodate... You accommodated everyone else. That is not fair. You didn't mention me. Evelyn said it simply. In your speech. About your daughters. You didn't say my name. The silence that followed that was a different kind than Salvatore had made. His silence had been power. This silence was exposure, the particular quiet of a thing that had been true for a long time and had just been said in front of witnesses for the first time. Catherine's expression was complicated. It moved through several things too fast to entirely track. The defensive reflex, the recalibration, and underneath both of those, something that might have been, for just a moment, something genuine, something that looked almost like shame. She started. Mom. Vanessa's voice. Evelyn looked past her mother. Vanessa had come across the floor too, ivory gown moving quiet against the floor, her face doing something it almost never did, looking uncertain. Her eyes moved between Evelyn and their mother and back again, and there was something working in them that Evelyn recognized as a calculation of a different kind than the one she was used to seeing there. Mom, Vanessa said again, reaching Catherine's elbow. Don't. Catherine turned. Don't what? Don't make it worse. Vanessa's voice was low, but the room was quiet enough that several nearby tables were getting every word. Her eyes went to Evelyn, and in them Evelyn saw something she hadn't expected from her sister. Not the managed warmth, not the cheerful performance. Something that looked like it actually hurt. Evie, you knew about the table, Evelyn said. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed. The seating chart. Mom sent it to the whole family chain 3 weeks ago. I know you saw it. Evelyn looked at her sister. You didn't say anything. Vanessa's hand moved toward her, reaching, the instinctive gesture of a woman who solved things with touch. I know. I should have. You should have, Evelyn agreed quietly. You didn't. The reaching hand stayed extended in the air between them for a moment. Then it fell. Landon Whitmore appeared at the edge of the family table's territory. He didn't come all the way to table 22. Stopped at a distance, the way someone stops when they're not sure whether the ground ahead of them is solid. His face was doing the work of a man performing composure over something that was quite clearly not composed at all. He looked at Salvatore, Mr. DeLuca. His voice was even. Credit to him for that. I don't think this is the appropriate venue to discuss business arrangements. I'm not discussing business arrangements, Salvatore said. I'm making introductions. There's a difference. Landon's eye twitched once. Just once. With respect, the implication, Salvatore said, is that the people in this room deserve to understand who they're celebrating with. That's all. It wasn't all, and everyone in earshot knew it wasn't all. But Salvatore had said it with such reasonable flatness that Landon had no clean angle to push against. Gerald Whitmore had crossed the floor to stand behind his son. The silver-haired man had collected himself, still gray beneath his tan but upright, the carriage of someone long practiced at crises. He looked at Salvatore with the eyes of a man doing math. "The debt," Gerald said, quietly. "The acquisition is not in discussion tonight," Salvatore said. Gerald's jaw tightened. "Then what is?" Salvatore looked at him for a long moment. "Tonight is about Evelyn." He said it with the simplicity of a fact. "That's all tonight is about." Autumn. Evelyn looked around the room. The band was still stopped. The MC had disappeared entirely, retreated somewhere behind the dais, and she didn't blame him. Guests at nearby tables were not even pretending to have private conversations anymore. The senator was watching with the practiced, neutral expression of a man who had spent a career ensuring his reactions never committed to anything. She became aware of the weight of it, the attention, the audience, the hundreds of eyes that had been pointing at her back table all evening and were now pointing at her face. Faces she didn't know, faces she vaguely recognized, faces that had been looking through her at family events for decades. All of them watching. Her mother was standing 3 feet from her with a complicated face and a glass still in her hand that she had no idea what to do with. Vanessa was one step back from that, and the tears that had been threatening in her eyes had won, not falling yet, but making themselves very clear. And Salvatore was beside her, standing still, giving her the room to say whatever she needed to say or nothing at all, making no demand on her, exerting no pressure, simply being there with that absolute density of presence that was the most stable thing she had ever stood next to. Evelyn felt it then. The feeling she'd been holding back since the kitchen door hit her chair. Not grief, not anymore. Grief had done its pass through her and left something else in its place. It was a small, quiet, completely unfamiliar feeling. It was the feeling of being worth the trouble. She looked at her mother. "I'm not angry with you," she said. And it was true. She'd checked, and it was true. Or at least it was true enough. "I'm tired. I've been angry for years, and I'm done with it. What I want now is something different." Catherine said nothing, listening. "I want you to know that every time you put me below Vanessa, every table, every speech, every Christmas joke about what I was eating, I felt it. Every single time. And I let you keep doing it because I thought eventually you'd see me, that I'd do enough or be enough and you'd see me." Evelyn breathed in slow. "I understand now that was never the arrangement." "Evelyn, I'm not finished." Catherine closed her mouth. In the room behind her, absolute stillness. "I'm not asking you to apologize in front of all these people. I'm not asking you to make a speech. I'm asking you to understand that after tonight, things are different. Because I'm different. And if you want me in your life, you'll have to adjust to that." She paused. "I'd like you to want me in your life, but I'm not waiting for it anymore." She picked up her wine glass. Her hand was almost steady. She looked at Salvatore. He was watching her with those dark eyes and that contained expression, and for a moment it was only the two of them in the room. Just the two of them, and the understanding that passed between them without language. Then she looked out at the room one last time, and she raised her glass. Not to anyone, not to make a point, just raised it the way you raise something when you are done with one version of a thing and beginning another. When the version of yourself that sat quietly beside the kitchen door and swallowed every... The glass was still raised. Evelyn held it there for one long second, not performing the gesture, not waiting for the room to respond to it, just holding it the way you hold a thing when you finally understand its weight. The wine caught the light. Her hand was almost steady. The word she hadn't finished saying was still in the air somewhere, dissolved into the quiet. Then she drank. And the room breathed. Not applause, not yet, not the full ballroom acknowledgement that had been building. Just the collective exhale of 300 people releasing tension they hadn't admitted they were carrying. A few people near the front began to clap, tentative at first, like testing ice, and then it spread, and within 20 seconds, most of the room was on its feet. Not for Vanessa this time, not for Catherine Hart's carefully constructed speech, for the woman beside the kitchen door who had raised her glass to nobody and meant it completely. Evelyn set her glass down and sat. She didn't look at the room while it clapped. looked instead at the linen tablecloth, at the small ring her wine glass had left on it, at the texture of the fabric under her fingernails, feeling the sound wash over her rather than trying to process it. She was not ready to process it. Some part of her was still sitting very still in the deep interior place she'd gone to survive the last 2 hours, and she needed another minute there before she could come back out. Salvatore sat beside her. He did not applaud. He just sat. And after a moment his hand found hers beneath the table, and she held it with a grip that was probably too tight, and he let her. Her mother had retreated to the family table. Vanessa had not. Vanessa stood at the edge of table 22 with her hands clasped in front of her and her mascara doing the careful work of not running, which was a battle she was clearly losing at the corners. The ivory gown, the perfect hair, all of it intact except for the expression underneath, which was the most unguarded Evelyn had ever seen on her sister's face. "Can I sit?" Vanessa asked. Evelyn looked at the empty chairs across the table. The Kellers had vanished at some point during the confrontation, slipped away quietly, and she didn't blame them either. The young man with the phone was gone. Just the two of them and Salvatore and the residue of everything that had just happened. "Sit," Evelyn said. Vanessa pulled out a chair and sat with the careful movement of someone who was not sure how much weight they were allowed to put on anything right now. She looked at Salvatore briefly, a look that was not unfriendly but was deeply uncertain, and then looked at Evelyn. "I knew about the table," she said. "No opening, no softening, just the admission, clean and direct. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I know you knew. I told Mom it wasn't right 2 weeks ago. I told her." Vanessa's hands were laced together on the table, knuckles going slightly white. She said the Whitmore side had specific requests about proximity to the dais, and it was a complicated situation, and she'd handle it, and She stopped. "You let her handle it," Evelyn said. "I let her handle it." Vanessa said it like swallowing something that didn't go down clean. "Because I always let her handle things. Because it's easier. Because my whole life, whenever it's been a choice between pushing back on Mom and just letting it be what it is, I let it be what it is. And you pay for that. You've always paid for that." Evelyn looked at her sister. There was a part of her that wanted to reject the apology, wanted to hold the anger a little longer, use it as a wall to stand behind, because the anger was at least familiar, and the thing on the other side of it was large and complicated, and required her to be soft in ways she was exhausted by. But she was 33 years old, and she had just stood up in front of 300 people in a metaphorical sense, and she was not going to lie to herself about what she felt. What she felt was grief, for the sister she'd wanted, for the version of this relationship that had never quite happened. "I know why you do it," Evelyn said. "That doesn't mean it didn't cost me." "It did." Vanessa's voice cracked at the last syllable. She pressed her lips together. "I know it did." They sat with that for a moment. The band had restarted, something low and ambient, the room reassembling itself around the disruption the way rooms do. Not as if nothing had happened, but with the determined forward motion of events that have a schedule to keep. "Is he—" Vanessa glanced at Salvatore again, then back at Evelyn, lowered her voice. "Is everything he said true?" "Yes," Evelyn said simply. Vanessa absorbed that. "How long have you known about what he does?" "Almost a year." "And you're okay with it?" Evelyn thought about how to answer that honestly. "I'm okay with him," she said. "It's not the same answer, but it's the only one I have." Vanessa looked at Salvatore one more time. He met her eyes without expression and without hostility, and Vanessa looked away first. "Landon is—" she started. Stopped. Started again. "This is going to be complicated. For Landon's family. I know. The debt. If Salvatore—" "Vanessa." Evelyn said her name quietly, and Vanessa stopped. "That's between them. Tonight you and I are talking about us. The other thing is between them." Vanessa nodded, slow. "Okay." "Okay," Evelyn agreed. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It was something earlier than forgiveness, the preliminary step where you agree to stand in the same room with the truth and not run from it. It was enough for tonight. Maybe it was enough. Vanessa reached across the table and touched Evelyn's hand briefly. Just a touch, not asking for anything with it. Evelyn let it happen. The reception continued, not as it had been, not with the same texture of uncomplicated celebration that the evening had started with. Something had shifted in the molecular structure of the room, the way a room shifts after a thunderstorm passes through it, everything the same and everything different. Conversations were quieter. People moved more carefully. The Whitmore table had closed itself off. The senior family members gathered in tight, their body language the specific architecture of a private crisis being managed in public. Gerald Whitmore and two men Evelyn didn't recognize had stepped away from the reception entirely. She'd seen them move toward the corridor near the east exit, Gerald's hand on the arm of the younger man, the urgent lean of people who needed walls around their conversation. She filed that away without examining it. Salvatore had excused himself 20 minutes after Vanessa left the table. "I'll be back," he said. He said it with the flat certainty he used when a thing was simply true, and she believed him, and he walked away toward the corridor near the bar. She sat alone at table 22. For the first time all evening, alone didn't feel like a punishment. She poured herself another glass of wine and watched the room and thought about nothing in particular and felt the exhaustion settle into her shoulders, like something physical and heavy but not entirely unpleasant, the exhaustion of having expended a large effort on something real rather than on something performed. The kitchen door swung open and shut behind her twice, and she didn't flinch either time. She was on her second glass, and something approaching a functional emotional equilibrium when she saw her mother coming toward her again. Catherine Hart walked differently than she had before. Still upright, her posture was a thing her body did on its own after 6 decades, but something in the carry of her had changed. The performance energy was gone. She looked, Evelyn thought, like a woman carrying something heavier than her dress. She sat down across the table without asking. Evelyn waited. "I didn't know," Catherine said. "About him? What he—" "I know you didn't. If I had, it wouldn't have changed the table, Mom." Evelyn looked at her. "That's what you need to understand. It wasn't about status. You would have put me somewhere better if you'd known who he was, and that's exactly the problem." Catherine was quiet. "You don't see me," Evelyn said. "You've never seen me. You see a reflection of whatever you think you're supposed to be, and I don't fit it, so I'm background. That's 33 years. That's not about tonight." Catherine's hand came to rest on the table, not reaching for Evelyn, just resting there. The hand of a woman sitting with something she hadn't sat with before. "Your father used to say I was too hard on you." Her voice was low, different from her earlier voice, stripped of the social surface, something older and quieter underneath. "He said it for years. I told him he didn't understand what girls needed to survive in the world we lived in." She paused. "He's been gone 12 years and I still hear him saying it." Evelyn looked at her mother. Catherine's eyes were wet, not performing it, just sitting with the particular wetness of someone confronting a long overdue accounting. "I'm sorry," Catherine said. "For the table, for the speech, for—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "For years of things I can't name fast enough," Evelyn breathed in slow. She thought about what she'd said before, that she wasn't waiting anymore, that she didn't need her mother to see her. That was true. It was completely true. And it was also true that she was her mother's daughter, and this moment was real, and she was going to let it be real. "I hear you," she said. "Not it's okay. Not I forgive you. Just, I hear you." Catherine nodded. Something in her exhaled. They sat there in this noise and light of the reception, two women and the long, complicated history between them. And it wasn't resolved. None of it was resolved. It would take years if it was resolvable at all. But it was acknowledged, and acknowledgement was the only honest beginning. Salvatore came back 22 minutes after he'd left. Evelyn knew it was 22 minutes because she'd been watching the time, not from anxiety exactly, but from the particular alertness that had been running under everything all evening, the low hum of not quite knowing what came next. He looked the same as he always looked, contained, unhurried, nothing in his face that required immediate reading. But something about the set of his shoulders, the specific quality of quiet he was carrying when he sat down, made a small nerve in her chest fire once. "What happened?" she asked. He picked up his wine glass, looked at it, set it back down. Gerald Whitmore wanted to have a conversation. About the debt. About the debt. A pause. And about you. She felt that land somewhere specific. About me. He wanted to know what it would take. Salvatore looked at her steadily. To make tonight go away. To reframe what had been said in that room. He had some ideas about how that might be structured. Evelyn stared at him. He wanted to... what? Buy your silence? He wanted to buy a version of events where I was simply an eccentric guest who made a speech, and where the significance of what was said was minimized. Salvatore's voice was level. He was very polite about it. What did you tell him? Salvatore looked at her. I told him there was nothing to buy, that the only person whose opinion mattered to me was sitting at table 22. She felt something shift in her chest again, that warmth that still surprised her, that quality of being chosen with precision and without theater. He didn't take that well, she guessed. He took it the way men like Gerald Whitmore take things they can't control, Salvatore said, which is with a smile and a note made in the back of the mind for later. His eyes held hers. I want you to know that. I want you to know it because it matters going forward. She understood him. He's going to make trouble. He's going to try to find leverage, Salvatore said it plainly. That's how men like that operate. They lose a confrontation and they look for a pressure point. He'll dig. He'll look for anything he can use. Use against you. A beat. Against you, Salvatore said. The temperature in Evelyn's understanding dropped about 10 degrees. Against me, she repeated. I'm a bookkeeper from... You're the woman I stood up for in a room full of people he needs to respect him. Salvatore's voice was even, but it had that bedrock quality again, that density. Gerald Whitmore doesn't have the reach to touch me directly. He knows that. He's not stupid, but he also knows that the most direct way to reach me is through something I care about. He paused. And tonight, in front of 300 people, I made very clear what I care about. The reception noise continued around them. The band, the conversations, the clink of glasses, all of it irrelevant, white noise behind the specific cold thing that was forming in the center of Evelyn's understanding. You're telling me I'm a target now? She said. I'm telling you you've always been a person who lived without protection because you didn't know you needed it. He held her gaze. That changes. She looked at him for a long moment. The candlelight between them, the noise of the room, the kitchen door behind her shoulder. What does that mean practically, she asked. What does changes look like? He started to answer. And then Vanessa appeared at the table, and this time she was not moving with the careful, uncertain motion of someone asking permission. She was moving fast, the ivory gown swept close to her legs, her face wiped clean of all its earlier emotion and replaced with something acute and alarmed. Evie. She reached the table and put both hands flat on the surface and leaned in. I need to tell you something. I should have told you 2 weeks ago. I almost did. She stopped, drew breath. Landon knew. About the debt. He knew who held it. Evelyn went still. He's known for 6 months, Vanessa said. Her voice had dropped low, the register of confession. He knew Salvatore held his family's debt. He knew before he met you. And when I told him I was inviting you to the wedding, when Mom was doing the seating and she asked Landon's family whether there'd be any issue with Evelyn's guest, Landon told his father who Salvatore was. The air in Evelyn's lungs felt suddenly insufficient. His father told Mom, Vanessa continued, not everything, not the details about the debt, not the full picture. Just that Salvatore was connected, powerful, the kind of man Catherine Hart would want at the family table. Vanessa's jaw was tight. And Mom still put you at 22. Evelyn heard that, processed it, let it travel all the way down to where it needed to go. Her mother had known. Not the full picture, not the criminal architecture, but she'd known Salvatore was significant. She'd been told. And she'd looked at that information, and she'd looked at her daughter, and she'd made the same calculation she'd always made. The apology 20 minutes ago, the wet eyes, the voice of her father. I'm sorry. Evelyn sat with that and felt something inside her go very, very quiet. There's more, Vanessa said. Evelyn looked at her sister. Vanessa glanced at Salvatore, then back. Landon's been in contact with people. I don't fully understand what I overheard. But after you and Salvatore went back to your table, Landon made a phone call and I caught the end of it. He said a name. She paused. He said, it's done. She made the connection in public. It's confirmed. Send the file to. Vanessa stopped. Not because she'd finished the sentence, because Salvatore's hand had come down flat on the table between them. Not a slam, not a threat, just the quiet, decisive placement of a man who needed the room to stop moving for 10 seconds while he processed what he'd just been told. The sound of his palm on the linen was small. The effect was not. Vanessa's mouth closed. Evelyn looked at Salvatore. His face had done that thing. The thing she'd only seen twice before in 14 months. The thing that was not anger and was not fear, but was the specific expression of a man whose internal calculations had just produced a result that required immediate action. The surface was exactly the same as always. Underneath it, everything was moving fast. Say the exact words, he said to Vanessa. Quiet. Precise. Everything you heard. In order. Vanessa's hands were still flat on the table. I was near the east corridor. Landon stepped out. He said he needed air, I thought. I followed him because I wanted to talk to him about what had happened with Evie, about the table, and he was already on the phone. She was keeping her voice low, words coming in tight, controlled groups. He didn't see me. He was facing the window. He said it's confirmed. She made the connection in public. They're together. The exposure is real. Then he listened for a moment. Then he said, send the file to Carver. Ipki Bassam. The name registered on Salvatore's face as a single fine vibration, gone in under a second. That's all? He said. He turned around and I moved back before he saw me. Vanessa's jaw was tight. I don't know who Carver is. I don't know what file. But the way he said it, the way he looked while he said it, Salvatore, he didn't look like a man making a business call. He looked like a man completing something. Salvatore was already pulling his phone from his jacket pocket. What's Carver? Evelyn asked. He didn't answer immediately. Typed something. Waited 3 seconds. The response came back fast. She could tell by the specific way he looked at the screen, not with relief, but with the tight, controlled expression of confirmed bad information. Carver is a name, he said. A federal contact. Justice Department. Long history of building RICO cases against organized financial networks. He pocketed the phone, looked at Evelyn directly. Landon Whitmore has been cooperating with a federal investigation. Has been for some time, by the look of it. The reception noise around them felt suddenly absurd. The band playing something warm and celebratory, the clink of dessert forks, a woman laughing 3 tables over. All of it belonging to a completely different evening than the one Evelyn was now sitting inside. The wedding, she said slowly, this entire, was a controlled environment, Salvatore said. Landon knew I'd be here. His family has been sitting on my debt acquisition for 6 months, feeding information, building a picture. Tonight was designed to produce a public confirmation. Me in a room full of witnesses, standing up, identifying myself, connecting myself explicitly to the Whitmore family's financial situation. His voice hadn't changed pitch. It was the steadiness of someone who was not surprised exactly, but who was registering the full cost of a miscalculation. I handed them exactly what they needed. Evelyn stared at him. Because of me, she said. No. You stood up because of me. You made the speech because, Evelyn. His eyes found hers and held. Don't. Don't what? Don't notice that I'm the reason you are not the reason. His voice was low, but it had an edge now, fine and clean. Landon Whitmore built a trap, and he used your family to bait it, and that is on him and on whatever handlers put him up to it. You are not responsible for what men like that do. A pause. I am responsible for walking into it. That's mine. She held his gaze. Her heart was a rapid, specific pressure behind her sternum. Not panic, something cleaner and more dangerous than panic. The understanding of stakes. What do you need to do? She asked. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, something quieter. The look of a man who was not accustomed to being asked that particular question by someone sitting beside him rather than across from him. I need to make a call, he said. He stood. He was gone 4 minutes. Evelyn sat at table 22 and looked at her wine glass and did not drink from it. Vanessa had retreated. Evelyn had told her to go back to Landon, to act normal, to give nothing away in her face, and Vanessa had looked at her with an expression that was equal parts guilt and something that might have been a long overdue recognition of her sister's competence. She'd gone. The room continued its celebration around Evelyn like weather continuing around a stopped clock. She thought about the file. Whatever a file meant in this context, documents, recordings, financial maps, the constructed anatomy of a man's criminal enterprise, assembled piece by piece over months or years, and now being sent to a federal contact on the night of a wedding that had been designed, at least in part, to produce one more piece of it. She thought about Salvatore standing at a forgotten table in a ballroom full of wealthy strangers and saying her name into the silence. She thought about the cost of that, what it had actually cost, what it was going to cost. Her hands were steady on the table. She checked them. Still steady. That was something. Salvatore came back in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She knew because she counted. He sat. His jaw was set slightly differently than before. Not tight, but with a decision in it that hadn't been there when he left. Marcus is pulling the intermediary structure, he said, not explaining who Marcus was, knowing she would either know or ask later. We have a window before Carver's team can fully process and act. It's not large. How large? Tonight. He looked at her. We leave before the reception ends. And then? And then this gets handled. He said it simply, the way he said things that were complex and which he was choosing not to burden her with the complexity of. She felt the impulse to push, to ask exactly what handled meant, to require the full accounting. She also knew, in a way she hadn't known before 14 months ago, that there were domains where the full accounting was not something she was equipped to act on, and that asking for it in this room in this moment was going to cost them time they didn't have. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. Then, there's something else. She waited. The file Landon sent. It's not only mine. He held her gaze. Your bookkeeping business. 2 of your clients were referred to you through a contact of mine 18 months ago. I didn't tell you the connection at the time. It wasn't significant then. His jaw moved slightly. It may be significant now. Carver's team will see your name in an adjacent position. The ground shifted under Evelyn in a way that was entirely metaphorical and felt entirely physical. My clients, she said, 2 of them. Clean businesses, legitimate operations, nothing dirty in the work itself. But the association, the referral path, my name alongside yours in any document, he stopped. They will look at you. She felt it travel through her, a cold, structural feeling, the specific horror of having your life examined under a light you didn't choose and potentially found wanting, not because of what you'd done, but because of who you'd sat next to at a coffee shop 14 months ago. Her bookkeeping firm. 8 years. 11 clients. Her actual life, the thing she'd built from nothing on 70-hour weeks. Would they find anything? She asked. Her voice came out steady. She was faintly surprised. In your work? No. Absolute. In your associations? That depends on what story they decide to build. He paused. Evelyn, I am sorry. You didn't sign up for this part of it. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the most unguarded expression she'd ever seen on his face. Not quite guilt, not quite anguish, but the specific weight of a man who had just watched the full cost of his choices land on someone else's shoulders and was holding that without flinching from it. She breathed in, breathed out. Stop apologizing, she said. Tell me what I need to do. What she needed to do, as it turned out, began with finding Landon Whitmore. Not to confront him, Salvatore had been clear about that, specific. Not a confrontation, not a scene. I need information, and a scene will lose it. What they needed was confirmation of the file's content, and confirmation of how far it had traveled. And the only person in this building who knew that outside the Whitmore inner circle was the man who'd sent it. Evelyn found him near the bar on the room's west side. He was standing with a glass of scotch and a manufactured ease that she now understood was manufactured. The specific performance of a man who was waiting for something and trying not to look like he was waiting. He saw her coming. His expression recalibrated in a fraction of a second, the slight tightening, the recovery, the social warmth turned back on like a switch. Evelyn, like she was an expected and welcome guest at his own wedding. Hell of an evening. It really has been, she agreed. She stopped beside him at the bar and ordered a club soda she didn't want because she needed something in her hand and her body needed no more wine. The bartender worked. She waited. Landon waited. They both looked at the room. "Salvatore make any calls?" Landon asked. Casual, entirely casual, the words of a man who didn't particularly care. "I don't keep track of his calls," Evelyn said. "Smart." Landon sipped his scotch. "Safer that way, probably." She looked at him. He was 31, broad-shouldered, the face of someone who had grown up being told he was exceptional and had organized his entire personality around maintaining that verdict. He was not stupid. He was also, she understood now, a man who had made a very specific kind of deal. The kind where you trade someone else's security for your own, and you find ways to make it feel like survival rather than betrayal. "You've known who he was since before the wedding," Evelyn said. A pause, smaller than he wanted it to be. "Vanessa mentioned something? I'm asking you." Landon turned his glass. "Evelyn, I don't think you used my family." Her voice was low, flat. "You used my mother's treatment of me. You knew she'd treat me badly. You knew Salvatore would react. You built an event around producing that reaction." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not wrong." Landon looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. The specific expression of a man who has told himself a story about what he was doing for long enough that he half believes it. "My family was going to lose everything," he said. Quiet, direct. The performance of ease was gone. Everything. 40 years of what my grandfather built, gone. And the people who could make that stop wanted something from me. He paused. "I didn't create the situation. I survived it. By pointing them at someone else. By cooperating with a legal investigation into organized financial, by pointing them at someone else," Evelyn said again. "Someone who kept your family alive." Her voice didn't rise. She kept it absolutely level because the level was more effective than the rise, and somewhere in the last 2 hours she had learned that. "Someone your family owes the fact of this wedding to." Landon's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what these people can do to a—" "What people?" She held his gaze. "Federal investigators? Or the people your family borrowed from in the first place?" A silence. "The file," Evelyn said. "The one you sent to Carver tonight. How much of it is mine?" Landon looked away toward the room. A long, slow look of a man deciding something. The scotch glass turned in his fingers once, twice. "Evelyn, how much?" He looked back. His eyes were tired in a way his face had been hiding all evening. The exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a sustained deception and feels the weight of it most clearly in moments like this one, when the person across from them is not performing anything. "Your name is in 3 documents," he said. "Client referral records, an annotated financial network chart, and a witness statement, share preliminary from 8 months ago, that identifies you as a known associate. Known associate." The words landed in her chest like something physical, cold and specific and irrevocable. "Those documents go to Carver tonight?" she asked. "They went an hour ago." He said it without cruelty and without satisfaction. Just a fact. "I'm sorry," he added. The apology of a man who meant it, and also understood it changed nothing. Evelyn set her club soda down on the bar. She thought about her firm, her clients, the 8 years, the 70-hour weeks, the careful, grinding, honest work. She thought about a coffee shop in the financial district, and a knocked-over cup and a man who said don't worry about it without irritation and meant it. She thought about table 22 and a kitchen door and a glass raised to nobody. She had come to this wedding as the woman her family had spent 3 decades making small. She was leaving it as something else entirely, as a woman whose name was in a federal document, whose business was adjacent to a criminal investigation, whose life had just been permanently altered by a chain of events that had started with a seating arrangement at her sister's wedding. She picked up the club soda again, because she needed her hands to be doing something. "You should know," she said to Landon, very quietly, "that Vanessa is going to find out exactly what you did. Not a version of it. All of it." She looked at him. "And you should spend the rest of this reception deciding what kind of man you want to be when she does. Because that decision, unlike the one you made 8 months ago, is still yours to make. She turned from the bar. Landon said nothing behind her. She found Salvatore at the edge of the room near the east corridor, standing in the slight shadow beyond the last table's candlelight, his phone in his hand and his attention on the middle distance. The specific stillness of a man in the final seconds before action. She came to stand beside him. He looked at her, read her face. Carver has the file. An hour ago. She kept her voice even. 3 documents. My name in all 3. Known associate. Something moved in his jaw. One small compression. I have to ask you something, Evelyn said. Ask. When Marcus pulls the intermediary structure, when you do whatever it is you're about to do tonight, is there a version of this where my name comes out clean? He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze and let him look. Let him give her the real answer rather than the comfortable one. Yes, he said, if we move fast enough. If Marcus gets ahead of the document chain before Carver's team can build a narrative around it. He paused. It's not a guaranteed version, but it's a real one. What does it require? It requires me to do things tonight that I was hoping not to need to do. He said it without evasion, without dressing it. Things that are not... He stopped. Evelyn, if you want out of this, I want my firm, she said. I want my name clean. I want the 8 years I put into building something honest to not get destroyed because I happened to fall in love with the wrong man in a coffee shop. She paused. It was the first time she'd used the word. In 14 months, neither of them had used the word. It sat in the air between them now, quiet and enormous and completely accurate. Salvatore looked at her with an expression she had no previous experience of seeing on his face. Something cracked open in it, something that had been held for a long time and had just, at the worst possible moment and the most right possible moment, let itself be seen. You're not going to tell me to be careful, he said. Not a question. Would it do any good? No? Then I'm not wasting the breath. She held his gaze. Go do what you need to do. I'll be here. He looked at her for one more second. Then he raised one hand and set it against the side of her face, a gesture she'd never seen from him before, something entirely outside his ordinary vocabulary of touch, his thumb at her cheekbone, his palm warm against her jaw. And she held still and let herself feel it completely. Don't leave this room, he said. Not for any reason. Not if Landon comes to you. Not if Gerald... I understand. If anyone... Salvatore. She put her hand over his at her jaw. I understand. Go. He looked at her one last time. Then he turned and walked into the corridor and the shadows took him, and she was standing alone at the edge of a ballroom full of people who had spent the whole evening finding out exactly who she was. Her heart was going hard. Her hands were not steady anymore. She'd stopped pretending they were. The club soda was warm in her grip and the room was too bright, and somewhere in a federal office an hour's drive away, documents with her name on them were sitting in someone's inbox, and the next 12 hours were going to determine what happened to the life she'd... The ballroom was still going. That was the thing that struck Evelyn as she stood at the edge of the east corridor and watched the reception continue around her. The band playing, the dessert service running, a small group of Whitmore cousins taking photos near the floral wall like nothing had rearranged itself in the last 2 hours. The world had a way of doing that, continuing, insisting on its own momentum regardless of what any individual person was standing in the middle of. She put her back to the wall and breathed, in through the nose, out slow. The club soda had gone flat in her glass. She set it on the tray of a passing waiter without looking at him. Her hands were cold. The room was not cold. The room was warm with candles and bodies and the generated heat of wealth performing itself. But her hands were cold from the inside, from the specific internal temperature drop of adrenaline metabolizing into something she didn't have a clean name for. Fear was part of it. She wasn't going to lie to herself about that. Her name was in a federal document. 3 documents. Known associate. Those words had the weight of a door closing, a thing that could not be unsaid once said. And she was standing in a ballroom in a burgundy dress bought on sale, while the man she loved was somewhere in the corridors of this hotel, doing things she couldn't see to undo a trap that had been built around both of them. But underneath the fear was something else, and she kept finding it every time she breathed down far enough. A steadiness she didn't fully recognize as her own, or rather, didn't recognize as belonging to the version of herself who had existed before tonight. That version would have been in the bathroom right now, would have been sitting in a stall with her shoes off and her back against the cold tile, managing her breathing and waiting for it to be over. That version had spent 33 years making herself small enough to fit in the spaces other people left for her. That version had raised a glass tonight and buried herself. Evelyn pushed off the wall. She needed to find Vanessa. Opot. Vanessa was in the bridal anteroom off the east corridor, a small private room the hotel provided for the wedding party, with a vanity mirror and a love seat and a small refrigerator stocked with water and champagne. Evelyn found her there because it was the place she would have gone herself, the room with a door that closed, the room with enough silence to think. Vanessa was sitting on the love seat with her heels off and her hands in her lap, staring at nothing specific. The perfect hair was still perfect, the gown was intact, but the expression underneath all of it was the face of a woman who had spent the last 2 hours having her marriage, her family, and her understanding of her own judgment systematically dismantled. She looked up when Evelyn came in. "Close the door," Evelyn said. Vanessa did. Evelyn sat across from her on the vanity stool and turned it away from the mirror, because she didn't need to see herself right now, didn't need any additional information about how the evening read on her face. "Landon confirmed it," Evelyn said. "All of it. He's been cooperating with a federal investigation for 8 months. He used the wedding, used our family's dynamic, to produce a public incident that would build the case." She kept her voice flat and factual, because the flat factual was what Vanessa needed right now, not the emotional accounting. That could come later. "Your husband knew who Salvatore was before he ever met me. He built a picture around it. He's been feeding documents to a federal contact for months." Vanessa was very still. "My name is in those documents," Evelyn continued. "Tangentially. Association, referral chain, nothing I did, but my name is there. Evie. I'm telling you because you need to know, not because I want you to feel responsible." Evelyn looked at her sister. "You didn't know. I believe that. But you're going to need to make some very hard decisions in the next few hours about what you know now and what you do with it." Vanessa's eyes were dry. She'd moved past the crying into something harder and quieter. "What decisions? Landon is going to come back into this reception and shawl and cut the cake and dance the first dance and act like a man celebrating his wedding." Evelyn paused, because that's what his handlers need him to do tonight. Nothing irregular, no signs of disruption, just a normal wedding reception in a ballroom full of witnesses. She held Vanessa's gaze. "You're going to have to decide whether you can stand beside him and do that. And then, after tonight, you're going to have to decide what kind of marriage you want to have with a man who told you none of this." A silence. "He was protecting his family," Vanessa said, not defending, testing the sentence, seeing how much weight it held now that she said it out loud in a room without Landon in it. "He was," Evelyn agreed, "and in doing it, he put my name in a federal document and used your family's mistreatment of me as operational bait." She let that sit. "Those things are both true at the same time. What you do with both of them being true is yours to figure out. I'm not going to tell you what to do." Vanessa looked at her hands. "I'm so sorry," she said, quietly. "For tonight. For the table. For years of letting Mom—" "I know." Evelyn leaned forward and put her hand over her sister's. "I know. We talked about that." She squeezed once. "Tonight changed things between us. I mean that in both directions. You came to tell me about Landon's phone call. You didn't have to do that. You chose me." She paused. "That mattered. It matters." Vanessa looked up. Her eyes were wet again. "I should have always chosen you," she said. Evelyn breathed. "Yeah," she said. "You should have." Then, "But here we are." It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a clean slate. It was something more honest than either of those. Two women sitting in a small room off a corridor at the worst wedding in recent memory, finding the first real ground they'd stood on together in 33 years. It was the beginning of something that would take time and work and many more difficult conversations and would probably never be entirely without its scar tissue. But it was real, and Evelyn had spent enough of her life accepting beautiful fakes. She would take the real thing in whatever condition it came. She was back in the ballroom at 11:14 when her phone buzzed. A text. Salvatore's number. 3 words. Stay where you are. She stayed where she was. The next 40 minutes were the longest of the evening, which was saying something. She stood near the back of the room, not at table 22, she couldn't make herself go back to that specific geography, but near the bar along the western wall, and watched the reception continue its wind down. The cake cutting happened at 11:30. Landon and Vanessa at the table, knife in hand, smiling for photographs while the guests applauded. Vanessa's smile was exactly right. Professional. Evelyn watched her sister hold it for 3 minutes straight and felt something in her chest that was equal parts respect and grief. Landon glanced toward the back of the room once, found Evelyn's face, looked away. Gerald Whitmore was back at the family table, silver-haired and reconstructed, performing the ease of a patriarch at his son's wedding. Performing it well. The 2 men he'd met in the East Corridor were back in their seats with their wives and their champagne. Whatever conversation had happened in that corridor, whatever reassurances or revised plans had been made, they had been made and filed away, and the surface had been restored. That was the thing about this class of people, Evelyn thought. The surface was always restored. That was the entire skill set, not preventing damage, but restoring surface. The damage lived underneath, in the structure, in the places nobody was supposed to look. At 11:52, her phone buzzed again. Come to the north entrance, now. She set her glass down and walked through the room without hurrying, the way she'd watched Salvatore move all evening, not performing calm, just not performing anything. Past the family table, past the Whitmore tier, past the dance floor where 3 couples were still moving to something slow. Through the main doors and left down the corridor to the north entrance, which opened onto a side street where a black car was idling against the curb, and Salvatore was standing outside it in the cold night air. He had no jacket. He'd taken it off somewhere in the last hour. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and there was a tension in the set of his whole body that she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled containment of the ballroom, but something that had been working very hard for a sustained period and was now standing very still from the effort of stopping. She pushed through the door, and the night air hit her, cold and wet. The rain from earlier dried now, but its memory in the temperature. She walked to him. He looked at her the way he'd looked at her before he went into the corridor. A thorough, checking look. The look of a man confirming something. You're okay, he said. I'm okay. She looked at him. What happened? He was quiet for a moment. Behind them, through the hotel's glass, she could see the lit shapes of the reception continuing its final hour. Above them, a handful of stars were visible through the breaking cloud cover. Marcus got ahead of the document chain, he said. The referral records, the network chart. Those documents no longer exist in the form they were filed. The data trail that led to your name has been restructured. He paused. You're not in it anymore. She absorbed that. The specific relief of it was not the giddy crashing relief she might have expected. It was something quieter and more structural, like a weight being removed slowly enough that her body had time to adjust. My firm, clean. His eyes held hers. Your firm is clean. Your name is clean. Carver's team has nothing that connects you. She breathed out slowly. And Carver? She asked. The investigation? What happens to... The investigation continues. He said it without evasion. That's not something that disappears. What changed tonight is its scope and its target and the material it has to work with. He looked at her steadily. I won't tell you it's over. It's not over. But the part of it that had your name in it, that part is done. She looked at him in the cold November air outside the Harrington Grand while his reception wound down inside. A man in a rolled-sleeve shirt with the controlled exhaustion of someone who had just done something very expensive and was not asking her to thank him for it. What did it cost you? She asked. A pause. Things I was holding for leverage, he said. Positions I was protecting. Some of the intermediary structure Marcus dismantled. I won't be able to rebuild it the same way. He said it plainly, not minimizing and not dramatizing. It cost me ground. It didn't cost me anything I'm not able to recover from. She looked at him for a long time. You dismantled your own infrastructure to get my name off a document, she said. To get your name off 3 documents. She almost laughed. Didn't quite. The laugh lived somewhere in the same space as the tears she hadn't let fall all evening, and she was not going to do either of those things on a sidewalk outside a wedding venue. Not after everything the night had already taken from her. "I told you I loved you," she said. "In there, at the bar." "I know." "I didn't plan to say it like that." "I know." Something shifted in his face. That open quality again, the thing she'd seen when he'd held her jaw in the ballroom. Something that had been very carefully protected for a very long time, choosing to be less protected. "I should have said it first, months ago. I don't have a clean excuse for why I didn't." She looked at him. "Because you didn't know if I'd stay," she said. "After you told me everything, you didn't know if knowing the full size of it would make me leave." His jaw moved once. That was answer enough. "I'm still here," Evelyn said. She stepped toward him, and he put his arms around her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and felt the warmth of him. The specific warmth of someone who had been outside in the cold, and whose shirt carried the faint residue of a long and difficult night. His hand came up to the back of her head. He held her with the care of someone who understood the weight of what they were holding. They stood there for a moment on the sidewalk. The rain had left the street reflective. The city moved around them, indifferent and enormous, carrying its 10,000 private emergencies with its usual complete lack of comment. She pulled back enough to look at him. "Landon," she said. "Landon cooperated with a federal investigation. That's not something I can undo, and I'm not going to try." His voice was level. "What he did to you, putting your name in those documents, using your family, that's between him and Vanessa. And eventually between him and consequences I had nothing to do with creating. You're leaving it alone." "I'm leaving it alone." He paused. "He's married to your sister. That's not a door I'm going to close." She thought about Vanessa in the anteroom with her heels off and her eyes wet and her hands in her lap, making the decision to tell her the truth. Choosing her. "Okay," Evelyn said. "Okay," he said. They went back inside long enough to say the necessary goodbyes. Evelyn found her mother at the family table, sitting now with a tiredness that the social armor could no longer completely cover. Catherine looked up when she approached, and something in her face did the rapid assessment it always did, and then for once found nothing that needed assessing, just her daughter coming toward her at the end of a long and irreversible evening. "We're leaving," Evelyn said. Catherine nodded. "Evelyn," she stopped, tried again. "Call me this week, please." Evelyn looked at her mother. At the 61 years of her, the seafoam gown, the posture, the eyes that had always looked slightly past her at something more fitting to the image. Those eyes were looking at her directly now, fully, without the glaze of performance. "I'll call," Evelyn said. It wasn't a promise of what the call would contain. It wasn't forgiveness pre-packaged and delivered. It was a door left open, a choice to keep trying, offered not because her mother deserved the grace of it, but because Evelyn had decided, somewhere in the last 4 hours, that who she was after tonight was not determined by who had failed to see her. She could choose generosity, not from weakness, but from the specific strength of someone who no longer needed anything from the person she was extending it to. That was new? It was entirely new. She let it be new. Vanessa found her near the exit. They stood for a moment without speaking, the noise of the reception at their backs, the corridor ahead. Vanessa looked at her with the direct, uncoded gaze she'd found in the anteroom. No performance, no management, just her sister. "I meant what I said," Vanessa said, "about choosing you. I know you did. It's going to be complicated, with Landon, with—" She exhaled. "Everything." "Yes," Evelyn agreed, it's going to be complicated." "Will you—" Vanessa stopped. "Can I call you? When it gets—" "You can call me." Evelyn looked at her. "Vanessa, you can call me." Something gave way in Vanessa's face. A small, quiet collapse of something that had been held up for a very long time. She pulled Evelyn into a hug that was nothing like their usual contact, not the managed touch of people performing sibling warmth for an audience, but the hug of two women who had just lived through something together and were both still standing. Evelyn held her back, felt the specific reality of her sister's shoulders, her arms, the slight shake in her breathing. "Go back inside," Evelyn said quietly. "You have a reception to finish." Vanessa pulled back, wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, laughed once, short and raw. "This has been the worst, best night," she said. "Yeah," Evelyn agreed. "It really has." They looked at each other. Then Vanessa turned and went back into the ballroom, and Evelyn watched her go, watched her sister square her shoulders and lift her chin and walk back into the life she'd chosen, complicated and expensive as it was, and felt something that was not quite envy and not quite pity, but something that encompassed both of them and transcended both. The particular tenderness of finally seeing someone clearly. The car moved through the city. Rain had started again, light and consistent, the kind of rain that doesn't commit to being a storm, but doesn't commit to stopping either. The streetlights made their long gold threads against the wet glass. Evelyn watched them from the passenger seat, the way she'd watched them on the way here, but the woman watching was not the same woman. That was the strange thing about nights like this. You couldn't feel yourself changing while you were inside it. You only felt the before and after, and the distance between them, and the understanding that you had crossed something that didn't go the other direction. She thought about this girl who had been 8 years old and stood in a bathroom mirror trying to understand what was wrong with her. She thought about the woman who had driven to a wedding tonight in a sail rack dress carrying 33 years of managed expectations. She thought about the glass she'd raised to nobody at table 22 and the feeling of raising it, the small private seismic shift of that gesture, the choice embedded in it. She looked at Salvatore. He was watching the road, hands easy on the wheel, the controlled exhaustion still in the set of him but quieter now, the exhaustion of completion rather than effort. He felt her looking and glanced over. "What?" he said. "Nothing." She looked back at the window. "Just looking?" A pause. Then, without looking at her, "You were right, earlier." "About what?" "That I didn't say it because I wasn't sure you'd stay." His voice was even, but the evenness was working slightly harder than usual. That was a failure of, I don't have a better word than cowardice. For a man in my position, the word sits badly, but it's accurate. She considered that. "You're not a coward." "I've done things in my life that required nerve." He kept his eyes on the road. This was harder. She understood that. She understood it specifically, in the way you understand something that lives in the same part of you. She had been brave about many things in her life, building a business from nothing, surviving years of family diminishment with her integrity intact, standing up in a hotel ballroom and saying what she said. She had been a coward for 14 months about 4 words. "I love you," she said, plainly this time. Not in crisis, not as a slip under pressure, just the clean stated fact of it. He was quiet for a moment. "I love you," he said. The same plainness, the same quality of something costly and accurate said because it was true and for no other reason. The rain came down on the windshield. The wipers swept it away. She rested her head back against the seat and looked at the city moving past and felt the weight of the evening settle into her properly. Not as a burden, but as a density, the specific heaviness of a night that had actually meant something. Her name was clean. Her firm would open Monday morning, and her 11 clients would send their invoices, and she would do the work she had built her life around. Her mother would call, or she would call, and they would have a conversation that would be the first of many, and none of them would be easy. Vanessa would navigate whatever came with Landon with the particular courage Evelyn had seen in her tonight for the first time, and it would be complicated, and it would hurt, and she would call. And Salvatore would continue to be what he was. A man whose world carried weight she didn't always see and sometimes chose not to look at. A man who had stood up from a table beside a kitchen door and changed the geometry of an evening and a life. A man who had spent tonight dismantling his own architecture to keep her name clean and who had offered not a word of martyrdom about it. She thought about what it meant, the thing he did. Not just tonight, all of it. The 14 months of showing up. The standing beside her. The question he'd asked at table 22 with the patience of someone who wasn't going to ask it twice. Do you want to keep letting them treat you this way? The greatest victory of her life was not the speech she didn't make. It was not the applause that had swept the ballroom, or the public humiliation of her mother, or the moment when 300 people rose for the woman beside the kitchen door. Those were real, and she wouldn't pretend they hadn't mattered, but they weren't the thing. The thing was the answer she'd given. The quiet, complete, 33 years in the making know that she'd delivered not for the room, but for herself. The moment she'd stopped waiting for a seat at someone else's table and understood, with the finality of a thing that couldn't be unfelt, that she had always had the right to build her own. That was the thing. She had built her own. 1 year later, the firm had 14 clients. She'd picked up 3 new accounts in the spring, 2 referrals, and 1 cold approach from a mid-sized logistics company whose CFO had worked with one of her longtime clients and wanted the same quality. She'd hired an assistant, a 24-year-old named Dana, sharp and methodical, who reminded Evelyn of herself at that age in the ways that mattered, and had better instincts about boundaries in ways Evelyn was still working on acquiring. Her office was on the 7th floor of a building 3 blocks from the financial district. Her name was on the door in clean sans-serif letters. Hart Bookkeeping. Simple. Hers. She had lunch with her mother on the 2nd Thursday of every month. The lunches were never without friction. Catherine was Catherine, 62 years of her, the posture and the calculation and the social instinct running underneath everything like a current that didn't switch off. But the friction was honest now. They sat across from each other without the performance layer, without the managed distance, and said things that were real and sometimes hard, and occasionally, unexpectedly, warm. At the 3rd lunch, her mother had said, "Your father would have liked him," meaning Salvatore. She'd said it without calculation, looking into her coffee cup, and Evelyn had heard the truth of it and held it quietly and not tried to do anything with it. At the 6th lunch, Catherine had said, "I'm sorry. Not for tonight. Not for any particular thing. For the pattern." She'd looked up from her coffee that time. "For 33 years of the pattern. I understand if that takes a long time." Evelyn had said, "It will." And then, "I'm working on it." That was the honest answer. She was working on it. The damage done by 33 years of specific cumulative diminishment did not undo itself because one night in a hotel ballroom, the architecture had cracked. It lived in reflexes, in the automatic flinch, in the residual instinct to make herself smaller in certain rooms. She worked on it. She had a therapist she saw every other week who had the particular quality of someone willing to sit in the hard room without rushing toward the exits. And she worked on it, and some weeks it was better, and some weeks it was just present. And she was learning to treat its presence as information rather than verdict. Vanessa had filed for separation in February. Not because Evelyn had told her to. She hadn't. She'd made a conscious and sustained choice to hold that door open without pushing it. Because Vanessa had made the choice herself, with the quiet, deliberate courage of someone finally doing a thing on their own terms. The marriage had lasted 5 months. Landon's cooperation with the federal investigation had become public knowledge in late January. The DOJ had issued statements, the financial press had covered it, the Whitmore Group had entered a restructuring that Gerald had tried to characterize as voluntary and that the coverage had not characterized that way. Vanessa had moved into an apartment in the east side of the city and started going back to work. She had an art history degree she'd never used and a gallery connection she'd made in college, and she was using both of them now, quietly and without announcement. She called Evelyn on Sunday evenings. Not every Sunday, but most of them. The federal investigation had, as Salvatore had said, continued. It had also, over the following months, found its level, a level that was significantly below what Landon's handlers had hoped to reach, and significantly above nothing. Salvatore had spent 3 months in what he described as an intensive renegotiation of his operational landscape, which was the most detail he offered, and the detail she didn't push past. She understood the shape of it without the specifics. She understood that the world he moved in was not one that resolved cleanly, that the costs of the choices he'd made on the night of the wedding had been real and were still being paid in ways that had nothing to do with money. She understood that loving him meant loving a man who carried things she would never fully see, and she'd made her peace with that the same way she'd made her peace with all the hard truths the year had offered, by sitting with it until the sitting stopped feeling like something that required courage and started feeling like something that was simply true. He stayed most nights. He was quietly thorough about his presence, not in the way of someone staking territory, but in the way of someone who had decided where he wanted to be and committed to it with the unhurried completeness he brought to everything. He made coffee in the mornings. Strong, no sugar, in the specific white cups she'd had since her first apartment. He read documents at her kitchen table at hours she was asleep. He learned the names of her clients without being asked, and asked after them by name and remembered the answers. He was present in a way that she was still, a year out, occasionally ambushed by. The ambush always came from the same direction, The contrast between who she'd been told she was for 33 years and who she was in a room where someone chose to see her accurately. She was working on closing that gap. The gap between the woman she'd been in that ballroom before Salvatore stood up and the woman she was building herself into. One Thursday lunch, and one Sunday phone call, and one Monday morning with the door open and her name on it. 1 year later, she sat at her desk on a Tuesday afternoon in November, the anniversary of the wedding. Though she hadn't planned the timing, it had simply arrived on the calendar and she had noted it and kept working, and looked out the 7th floor window at the city below. The same city, the same gray November light, the rain coming down in the same non-committal way. She thought about table 22. She thought about the glass she'd raised. She thought about the woman who had pressed her hands flat on an ivory tablecloth and made the only decision that had ever actually mattered, which was to stop waiting for someone else to decide she was worth the trouble. There was a knock at the open office door. Dana, standing in the frame with a folder and her reading glasses pushed up into her hair. The Morrison account needs a signature by 4. I'll have it done by 3. And someone dropped this off at the front desk. She came in and set an envelope on the corner of the desk. Cream-colored. No return address. Evelyn's name and handwriting she recognized. She waited until Dana left. Then she opened the envelope. Inside, a card. Plain and clean, no ornament. In Salvatore's handwriting, which was what it always was, economical, precise, the handwriting of a man who said what he meant. Dinner tonight. The place on Archer Street. 7 o'clock. Wear whatever you want. She turned the card over. On the back, in the same handwriting, 3 more words. You look beautiful. She sat with the card in her hands for a moment. Outside the window, the city moved through its Tuesday with complete indifference. Below, people crossed the street and hailed cabs and stood under awnings waiting for the rain to make up its mind. All of it ongoing. All of it continuing the way things continue when the important part has already happened somewhere inside a person and the world simply hasn't caught up yet. She set the card on her desk where she could see it. Then she pulled the Morrison file toward her and opened it and began to work. She was at 34 years old, exactly where she had put herself, not where anyone had left her, not in the space someone else had made for her at the back of the room beside the noise and the heat and the swinging door. She was at her own table. The light came in from the west window and lay clean across her work, and outside the November rain came down, and she did not wait for anyone's permission to begin. Fade out.